I'm Grandpa Willie, fourth grade grandpa that's been in Sango for a while, and I just come so that I can read to some fourth graders, those at Sango Elementary. And my book that I'm reading is Barnabas Bones. The Honorable Barnum Brown discovered the most famous dinosaur in the world, and it's by Tracy Fern. As soon as Barnum could toddle, he followed along behind his pa's plow, plucking up the ancient corals and clams and snails and scallops that unearthed as his father was plowing. Barnum filled boxes with the fossils collections. He filled his dresser with his collections. He filled his entire bedroom with his collections. When he filled the front parlor, his mama, who had never considered that the important, unusual things she had dreamed of for her son would involve fossil shells, shellfish in the parlor, and made him move his treasure out to the laundry house. Barnum spent years studying his collection, trying to imagine what the world must have been like millions of years ago when his family's high dry farm was at the bottom of a shallow swirling sea. Then one day he read about dinosaur fossils that had been unearthed in the West. Brontosaurus and Triceratops and T-Rex. Barnum longed to find some bones for himself, especially bones from species that no one had ever found before. Barnum got his chance when he took a course in pathology at the University of Kansas. He was such a good student that his professor invited him to spend the summer in 1894 and 1895 on fossil hunts in South Dakota and Wyoming. Each morning, Barnum set out at sunrise. He hiked over mountains, across creek beds, down precepts, and through streams and around rattlesnake nests. Most folks would think this was torture. Barnum thought it was wonderful. Barnum, who was an unusual, nice dresser, sometimes went prospecting in a fur coat and a suit and tie, buffalo black boots, and bowler hat. No matter how he was dressed, Barnum found bones. He didn't discover any new species, but he and the rest of the Wyoming expedition collected more than 1,400 pounds of bones, including a 6-foot long, 4.5-foot wide, nearly perfect Triceratops skull. Henry Fairfield Osborn, a professor at Columbia University and administrator at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, heard about Barnum's talent for bone hunting from Barnum's professor at the University of Kansas. Professor Osborn wanted the museum to have the best dinosaur collection in the world. So far, the museum had none. Professor Osborn hired Barnum to work on fossil hunts for the museum. Most people call the slightly terrified Professor Osborn Sir, but Barnum called him my dear professor because he loved bones as much as Barnum did. My dear professor sent Barnum back to Wyoming in 1897 to hunt fossils. Once again, Barnum didn't discover any new species, but he did unearth the museum's first important dinosaur, two enormous long-necked sauropods and diploids, Longus and Aponeus. Then in December 1898, my dear professor sent Barnum on a collecting trip in Patagon in the South America. Barnum found 4.5 tons of mammal fossils. Despite being shipwrecked and nearly eaten by a mountain lion, more than a year later he returned to New York City with his boatload of bones. He must be able to smell fossils, my dear professor said. Barnum had more than just a good nose. He pored over maps and genealogy books. He charted with local people. He studied the shape and color and texture of the rock layers. His passion for fossils led him to uncover more and more bones, but he still dreamed of discovering something new. One morning in 1902, Barnum's friend William Hornaday, the director of the New York Zoological Park, gave Barnum an interesting rock that he had found on a hunting trip in the Badlands near Hell Creek Mountain. Barnum's nose started twitching. The rock wasn't just any rock. It was the horn of a Triceratops. In June of 1902, Barnum and a small crew headed by train and then by horses to the Badlands. Barnum found lots of fossils, but they were all damaged or familiar. Back in New York, my dear professor was getting cranky. His rival at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh had made an exciting find, many bones from a new species of dinosaur, Diplodocus carnegie. It was named after Andrew Carnegie, a businessman and founder of the museum. This is the museum. I wanted to try to get to show them some pictures. One day, Barnum spotted some boulders that had tumbled down a steep cliff. He scrambled off his horse and up the cliff. He found a bone the color of milky coffee sticking out of the hillside. Barnum swished away loose and with a soft brush. Then he started digging around the bone with his pick. The deeper he dug, the more bone he found. Barnum dug until night fell. The next morning he returned with his crew, and they dug until they hit a layer of flinty blue sandstone near as hard as steel. Barnum carefully blasted off layers of rock with dynamite. Then the quarry filled with metallic ping and hammers and scraping of owls against bones and the soft whisper of brushes. Finally, Barnum began to see the outline of a massive curving bone, a dinosaur's pelvis, and then he uncovered a few of the creature's backbones and thigh bones, and an arm and bone and other fragments. Barnum had never seen anything like these bones before. This was the fancy bone that he had found. Unfortunately, by early October, the season was over. Soon snow would cover the Badlands. Barnum had to get his fragile bones safely to the museum. He painted a shellac on exposed parts of the bones, covered the shellac with a thin layer of newspaper, and slattered on layers of plaster, soaked burlap stripes to form a hard protective cast around the fossils. Barnum hitched 4 horses to a wagon and slowly pulled the 2-ton pelvis and other bones 130 miles back to the train. Along the way, Barnum couldn't resist collecting some interesting leaves and what he thought might be for ancient crocodile skeletons too. This is him and the bones being pulled by a wagon, 4 horses. For the next few seasons, Barnabas was busy on other fossil expeditions, but he and his crew returned to Hell Creek in June 1905 to remove more bones. During the winter months, they worked in the museum laboratory trying to fit bone fragments together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. My dear professor named the new dinosaur species Trigosaurus rex, the king of kings, the figure machine. Barnum called it is his favorite child. And this is where they were trying to put all them bones together, all scattered out like a jigsaw puzzle. Barnum and my dear professor studied the T-Rex bone fragments and even displayed a portion of the skeleton in the museum. But many pieces of the T-Rex puzzle were missing, including the complete head. Barnum longed to know more about his new dinosaur. What exactly did it look like? What did it eat? How did it walk? So in 1908, Barnum and a few men went to an area of the Badlands that he had never searched before. Barnum looked for weeks and collected nothing but sunburn and mosquitoes. So he was ate up by the mosquitoes and sunburn. On July 1st, Barnum and his horse Brownie were clip-clopping along Big Dry Creek after another long, hot, and fruitless day of prospecting. Barnum had already combed his area several times. He knew he had started looking somewhere else, but somehow he smelled fossils. He scanned the butts one last time. Suddenly, Barnum saw an unusual rock glittering in the sun, glittering in the sun. Barnum and Brownie clambered up the butt for a closer look. Yes, just as Barnum had hoped, the unusual rock was the smooth, rounded end of a bone. But what exactly was it? The next day, Barnum and his crew dug a 6-foot trench around the bone. They found bones everywhere, but the bones were too jumbled and too deeply embedded in the sandstone to identify. Barnum scraped and plowed and dug and blasted for weeks and still did not know what he had found. To make matters worse, he couldn't find any additional men to help make the digging or the cooking go far faster. Luckily, Barnum was an unusual good cook, so he was the one that got a chance to do the cooking with the crew that he had. Slowly, Barnum uncovered enough bones to identify his find. It was the treasure he had dreamed of, a perfect 4-foot-long T-Rex skull, studded and serrated 6 inches long teeth. In fact, the whole skeleton was nearly perfect, with only the leg bones missing, together with his feet, and finally had enough bones to piece together the entire animal. Barnum, who was an unusually good dancer, celebrated his find at the nearby ranch by doing the tango and the two-step until midnight. My dear professor was so excited that he decided to come to Montana to visit the T-Rex himself. So this is Barnum's dancing, celebrating his finding of the T-Rex. It took Barnum until October 1908 to dig up all the bones and haul them by horse and wagon to the nearest train. Then it took 7 more years to clean and mount the skeleton. At last, Barnum could see what he had dreamed about for so long. the complete skeleton of an entirely new dinosaur species, a whopping big one, too. Barnum's new flesh-eating dinosaur was 47 feet long with a huge feet and sharp claws. T-Rex quickly became the most famous dinosaur in the world. Millions of visitors came to see it. Hundreds of scientists came to study it. So Barnum went on to collect bones all over the world. He hunted by raft in Canada, by elephant in India, by airplane in the United States, and by diving in Cuba. Barnum collected more dinosaur bones than anyone on Earth, but T-Rex was still his favorite. So these are all the different bones that he found and collected. So just as family had wanted, Barnum did something important and unusual. He discovered a sleeping dinosaur and brought it back to life. 66 million years after extinction, T-Rex lives on the Barnum bones. And this is where they had done covered it up so it looked like its original self. And Barnum got a chance to sit on it and ride on its back. And that ends our story of Barnum's bones. We hope that you enjoyed that story.